Howdy, I'm Kyle McClinigan, the multimedia editor for the Battalion, and welcome to this week's episode of the Batt Signal. In light of recent administrative decisions, a group of predominantly former students known as the Rudder Association has garnered traction across social media for alleged involvement with the decision-making of Texas A&M University's top administrators for the future of A&M. Internal documents from the association, including meeting minutes, emails, newsletters, budgets, and more, take credit for having influence on many recent policy changes at Texas A&M. These documents were obtained by an anonymous source within the Rudder Association that the Battalion has independently verified. Here to discuss the findings and their possible implication is opinion editor Nathan Barnell, one of the authors of the findings. Thanks for being with us, Nathan.
Happy to be here.
So for those that haven't had a chance to read the article yet, what is the Rudder Association and what are their goals?
Well, going from just their tagline, the Rudder Association is dedicated to putting the Aggie back in Aggie land, of sorts. The association's actual goals were enumerated very well throughout their early documents, and I mean very explicitly at times, focusing on certain organizations such as Fish Camp and ourselves at the Battalion, but also the Corps of Cadets, expanding it, growing that program, and growing the amount of cadets that are at Texas A&M. Others included a question related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in people's lives on the undergraduate 2021 application for the university. Other topics included specific activists, such as those who had led the 2020 Sully protests, and retaliating against them in a number of different ways, claiming that they bullied people online and so forth for conservative views. So the Rudder Association is fairly multifaceted, but its goal is specific, and it's preserving a certain traditional culture at A&M, specifically the culture that the members, which are largely former students from approximately 1990 and earlier, many of which are even members of the Sol Ross group, a constituency of people who have been out of A&M for 55 years or more. All of these members largely have an idea of A&M as it was, a tradition-focused, very conservative, largely white place. And this being based off their Facebook comments, their internal newsletters, their internal meeting minutes, and other discussion between the members, it's pretty apparent that they have an idealized version of what A&M should look like and what it once did look like. Whether that A&M ever existed or not is up for discussion, but they do believe that woke ideologies, quote-unquote, have infiltrated A&M at the highest levels. That included former President Michael K. Young, may even include, according to some of their conjecture, Chancellor Sharp, and they went out of their way to confirm that did not include the A&M System Board of Regents, among, to quote them, numerous other administrators, third parties, state government officials, and other related A&M bodies. So, whatever woke ideologies are meant to be interpreted as, that is what they're dedicated to rooting out at A&M.
Okay, and what are some of the most telling findings from the internal documents that the Battalion received?
The most telling is, I think, the most simple fact that they established relationships up to the governor's office for the state of Texas, with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, all the way down through the Board of Regents, through admin, such as President Banks, such as VPSA Ramirez, down to namesakes at Fish Camp and students and student organizations such as Young Americans for Freedom. They built a very close set of relationships over the course of almost 2 years. And I think it's telling that many of those involved with those relationships have chosen to distance themselves, both in comments to the Battalion and public statements more broadly. Even in internal statements, the Board of Regents and former VPSA Lieutenant General Joe Weber decided that they did not want to be noted publicly as being in contact with the Rudder Association. These relationships were meant to serve a purpose. They weren't meant to be public facing.
Okay, so kind of going into that, many of the people that appeared in the meeting minutes were not available for comment at the time of publication, but those that were available seemed to downplay the association's involvement and goals. Do you know why members of the association seemingly contradicted themselves when it came to their original statements?
Well, I would not want to speculate into their mindset or their specific reasoning, but circumstantially, what the facts present is that internally, among their own board members, when strategizing, when discussing how to achieve their goals, not something that was necessarily meant to be published to members, although it was often sent to members in the form of updates later saying how much impact that they had had in a short amount of time. It appears to me that the members of the Rudder Association, but also figures such as President Banks, Vice President from MARCOM, Marilyn Martel, and VPSA Ramirez, all downplay their involvement by saying something akin to, well, it's normal for university leadership to meet with alumni and to meet with third parties and to have sort of an open door policy. And that is a rational explanation, but it appears that they are avoiding the topic of how they specifically treated and received any number of those groups. Because among receiving and having audiences to all these different groups, that does not clarify, at least for the record, how they received and how they interacted with the groups in any of those meetings, no matter which group it is. So that's where the contradiction comes in. They address that they may have met or may not have met, whether the internal documents contradict that or not in the first place, but they do not elaborate on how they actually viewed the content that the Rudder Association brought them in most instances. Joe Bourgeois' statements to the battalion directly contradict things he has said in internal documents, or is at least noted to have said in internal documents, and said on his podcast. But as readers can see for themselves in the article, a lot of that is semantic at times, saying if he met with Ramirez in an official capacity versus an unofficial capacity. It is very difficult to discern, based on these statements, what was actually representative of the Rudder Association or not. That's why, largely, the Batt's investigative team relied on the internal documents themselves, because there was no quote-unquote audience that they were writing for other than their own notation in these documents.
Yeah, so in the internal documents, they seem to, or at least portray an organization that has a lot of sway, as you said, all the way up to Governor Greg Abbott. But when spoken to in person on the record to the battalion, they downplay that. Do you think the Rudder Association has as much sway as it presents itself in the documentation, or does it have as little sway as the organization members told the battalion, or does it fall somewhere in between?
It certainly falls somewhere in between on a factual basis. But again, because members of administration continue to deny the extent of the Rudder Association's impact, that's hard to discern. However, we can say that the Rudder Association has absolutely attempted to have such a wide variety of influences. Whether they have been successful is something that could only be determined by admin and other key decision makers going on the record and saying that it is so. It is unlikely that they will do so. It is unlikely that they will go on the record to cast judgment one way or another on if the Rudder Association was influential on policy changes. However, we can say factually that the Rudder Association has made a very wide attempt and has a wide variety of communications and conversations with influential decision makers, even if they did not actually have an impact because of those conversations. And several other groups, student organizations, student leaders, and nonprofits in the Bryan College Station area can be seen on Twitter within the past 24 hours talking about how it has taken weeks or months since these current officials came into office in A&M's administration, and they may have never received an audience. They may never, or it may have taken a long time for them to receive an audience. Meanwhile, the Rudder Association does have a much higher rate of success, it seems, anecdotally speaking.
Okay, and kind of going into that, talking about Twitter, has there been any reaction from students online since the publication of the article?
As it stands, the article is approaching about 2,000 likes and a given number of retweets, and there are quote tweets and other posts sharing content from the article that have reached several thousand more reactions. So I would say that there has been a decent reaction not only from students but from former alumni, other journalists and media outlets, and people who care about higher education. Would like to point out that it is all not necessarily positive. On Facebook, there are a great number of upset and disagreeing comments on our article and more broadly. But in general, it seems to be grabbing the attention of the public.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
For our next and final story, students, faculty, and staff have voiced concerns over supposed plans regarding the future of university libraries, as more structural changes continue to unfold within Texas A&M. As they currently stand, the university libraries consist of 5 campus libraries, which employ 147 faculty and staff members, 81 of whom are tenure or on track to become tenured. However, under the newly proposed plans, library faculty must seek a new department in order to keep their tenure, or will be converted to staff members if they choose to stay following the reorganization. In the past weeks, a rumor spread claiming that the libraries would become fully digital with this change. Associate Vice President for Marketing and Communication Kelly Brown said this isn't true in a comment to the Battalion. Quote, "Despite the rumors, Texas A&M is not turning into an all-digital unit, nor will all the libraries be turned into office spaces, and libraries will continue to play a critical role in helping our students and faculty excel." However, students and faculty alike continue to voice their concerns regarding tenure. English sophomore Lauren Head, a representative for the Department of English, started an online petition that has already garnered over 2,200 signatures. A faculty member who wished to remain anonymous said there was an important distinction between faculty and staff librarians' administrative status. Quote, "I feel devalued. I think that the work that we do matters. I think that the work that we do matters to our faculty colleagues. It feels like no matter what option we choose, we will lose some of the opportunities to contribute to campus in the ways we've tried to do for so long. Every librarian that I've spoke to has been looking for jobs." This week's contributors are Nathan Varnell, Casey Stavenhagen, and Grant McLaurin. This episode was produced and edited by Kyle McClinigan.